Hello and welcome back to Jo's Art History Podcast, a podcast which celebrates all things art historical with me, your host, and your resident art historian, Jo McLaughlin. Welcome back everyone, this is episode 59. And this week on the podcast, the wonderful Gemma Louise returns to speak about another incredible female performing artist. This time, in the spotlight, it is the incredible Yoko Ono. Now, it is completely fair to say that Yoko Ono's artistic practice has been completely overshadowed, in terms of mainstream media anyway, by her husband, who, if you've been living under a rock, was, of course, John Lennon of the Beatles. John and Yoko actually met when John sought Yoko out at a London exhibition that she was opening. Now, I don't actually spend very much, if any, time discussing the relationship in this podcast episode. It is purely a celebration of Yoko's incredible artistic practice and groundbreaking works that really paved the way for female performance artists following her. This includes the incredible Marina Abramovic, and Gemma and I discuss the similarities in some of their earlier pieces, but of course Yoko did it first. Gemma has chosen 3 poignant, beautiful works, and I think particularly now with what's going on in the world, one of these works in particular is very, very relevant and poignant and can speak of hope in very dark times. The 3 works we are discussing this week are Cut Piece, Wish Tree, and Add Colour, Refugee Boat. This is an incredible episode, and I just want to thank Gemma once again for coming on and being not only a brilliant guest, but also opening up and allowing me the opportunity to dive into an artist practice that I really had given no time to. I am someone that, like a lot of people, had the very outdated opinion that Yoko Ono was the woman that split up the Beatles, and first of all, that's just nonsense. It's 2023, let's look at a woman in her own right, and I can't believe I've gone so long without really understanding, knowing or appreciating her practice. I want to thank Gemma very much for doing that for me, and I really hope this episode does it for you as well. So without further ado, sit back and relax as Gemma and I discuss the truly incredible works of Yoko Ono. Yoko Ono, who we're talking about today. Again, I'm going to start this podcast by thanking you. I've thanked you before I hit record, and I'm going to thank you again now we've hit record, because as I said to you before we started recording, I have completely underestimated who Yoko Ono was, her contribution as an artist, as a feminist icon, and as someone who really has been at the forefront of artistic movement since the 1960s, mid-1950s, shall we say?
Yeah, pretty much.
And I found this great quote, which you were nodding along when I've said it, from Mr. John Lennon. Yoko Ono is the world's most famous unknown artist. Everybody knows her name, but nobody knows what she does.
It sums her up entirely.
And why is that though? Is it the whole, it must, for me, I know her as the woman that split the Beatles, which is such an outdated view to have, even though I'm not really, like, I like the Beatles, but I'm not a massive fan. Like, it's like every band, they split up. But Yoko Ono, how did she come into your orbit? Where was the first time you came across her, and why has she had such an impact? Well, I mean, that's a silly question, because by the end of this podcast, everyone's going to be like, oh my God, this person is amazing.
The first time I came across Yoko Ono was actually when I was in college, and I was doing my little foundation art degree, and I was really focused on movement and the idea of performance art. Like, I was fully exposed to it all together, and Yoko Ono came up a lot, Marina Abramovic came up a lot, Caroline Schneemann came up a lot as well, and I got delving into it a bit more, and I like the whole instruction kind of encompass, and I actually did my whole module that was kind of based upon that with my own personal work. So I took the idea of teamwork exercises of like the knot experiment. I don't know if anybody's done it before, but you're supposed to all put a hand in the middle, grab somebody else's, put your other hand, grab somebody else's hand, and try and untangle your way out. So I kind of like was giving instructions based on like those typical teamwork things. And like that was, as I delved further into like Yoko's work, that's something that she loves doing. Like she loves like having like being able to get the audience to participate, but also, you know, trying to create scenarios as well for people within her work to like come across and challenge the mind, basically challenge people's reactions.
Yeah.
And then following on for that, we were lucky enough to go on a trip to go and see her work at the time, which, as you lovely reminded me, was at the Serpentine. And that was like an encompass of like all of her work at the time. And I just fell in love. Simply, like my first initial reaction to her was like, in terms of the name, when I first came across her name was, oh, she was with John Lennon, she was part of the Beatles. And I think everyone kind of has that interpretation of it because of how popular they were at the time and how just basically how much of an impact they had on like the music realm and everything like that. So it's a bit unfortunate she's kind of got that view, but there was like quite a few things even within that realm she did as well. Like with Lennon, she did quite a lot of things. Like she did the bedding, which was probably the most famous thing that she did in terms of like, you know, she did it with Lennon, who's so popular and so on like that, but that was like main like thing I think she probably got recognized for. But when you look at her whole career and reflect on it, actually she should be recognized for everything else that she's done, because she's contributed so much, especially from a feminist point of view, activist just in general, quite a lot of things.
It's crazy. So the first time I realized that she was an artist, I think I mentioned this to you the last time that we spoke. I accidentally happened to be in Liverpool the last weekend of a show, which I looked up, called Double Fantasy, John and Yoko. And it was a world first, where it was essentially Liverpool museums had worked closely with Yoko Ono and the John Lennon Foundation, and it told the story of their romance in their own words.
Yeah.
And they met while she was setting up an art exhibition in London. I remember seeing the ladder piece that was in the show, and I was like, oh my God, I didn't know she was a conceptual artist. This is wild. And then that thought just has completely escaped me until you wrote and were like, let's do this recording, let's do this podcast.
Yeah, it was interesting because when they met, she had one of her pieces there, which was, I can't remember the name of it, you'll probably know it. Hammer and a Nail.
Yes.
It was just a painting which had a hammer next to it, nails next to it, and there was an instruction for whoever came to see that piece to take out a nail and just hammer it into the painting. And he wanted to do it before the exhibition opened. And she was like, no, I'm not going to let you do that. Like, I don't care who you are. Like, no, this is like integral to my piece. Like, I don't want it to be like ruined by somebody already interacting with it before the exhibition opens.
Yeah.
The point is for it to start as a blank, not to start as, well, John Lennon did this, so everybody's going to do it now.
She's somebody that I think I could spend a lot of time reading about and just find more and more things to be impressed about. Her, just to give everyone just like a very brief sort of backstory of Yoko Ono, she was born in Tokyo in 1933. She was born to very wealthy parents. Her father was actually a concert pianist, but then stopped doing that and became a banker.
Yeah.
And her mother was a painter.
Yeah.
And she was privately educated, and her family moved to the States, but she stayed in Japan and enrolled in a philosophy course. And she was the first woman to be accepted either to that university, and this is in 1951, 1952. And when you think of 1950s, 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, to be a Japanese woman, to be Japanese was a very difficult thing, because we're speaking just as Oppenheimer has been released about Hiroshima and the atomic bombs, and that was resulting in a war between Japan or aggressions rather, between Japan and America. And in that time, to be, even after the war had ended, to be Japanese in America was an incredibly difficult, challenging thing.
She definitely developed an aggressive attitude during this time, like during that development, because obviously they were around when obviously all the bombs were going off. They were forced to like beg for food. Like They literally had to do everything that you could think of that was unimaginable at the time. And to see her like get out of that, like that family like pull themselves out in a way and then face another like obscure situation, that's another challenge, another upheaval to go through, was just, it boggles the mind is the only way I can describe it.
And it's something I've never really considered, or I think a lot of people forget to think about when an artist is making work, what's going on in society at the time. And not even just their society, not even in New York, but what's happening in Japan, what's happening in Europe, what's happening
everywhere.
Because it plays such a huge factor to it. And she came to the States because her family were there. Can you tell us a little bit? Because she enrolled in a university, Sarah Lawrence, have I got that? Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So she enrolled there and she did everything. She did like her course there. And then I think she went back to Japan to just study further, if I remember rightly, and then ended up bouncing back to New York again. So she did a bit of back and forth. So there was quite a lot of stuff. But during her time in Japan, that's when she started like getting more involved in like the art movement in terms of performance, in terms of like more collaborative pieces with the audience, that kind of thing. And that's when she then performed her first piece that I know of and adore so much, was Cut Piece. And that was in like the 1960s. And so the context of this, they've gone through so much already with everything that's gone off, with all the bombings and so on. If no one is aware of the culture in Japan in general, it's very reserved, it's very polite. You know, there's certain boundaries in place. Like even till this day, if you were to go there now, like us in British culture, like if you were to like sit in a train or whatever, it's normally very loud, whatever. Whereas Japan are very polite, very, you know, there's other people here too, very like concealed and within themselves and everything like that. So the idea of this cut piece, especially in the location that it was with everything that's happened, was a very challenging piece, I feel, for the people that came to see it. And Cut Piece was just, she was just sat there in like this, I believe she got it made for her, I'm not 100% sure, but it was like a black like dress gown like kind of thing, or it was like a two-piece thing. The way she's sitting, it looks like it's like a whole thing. And the setting instructions was, she had a pair of scissors by her, and setting instructions were, you can, one by one, you are all welcome to come up to me and cut a square off my clothing off me and take it with you. And it's interesting to see the reactions of people, because they were very, very hesitant to do it. And I can completely understand why. But then as like time passed and progressed, which is, you know, another thing that you can compare with Abramovich with her works as well, with when she was challenging people to do similar things like this to her, people then settled into the idea and then started to do what they asked, and then seeing how far it would go. I believe there was someone that even cut her hair as well with the scissors at one point. So it was, really interesting to see how that time helps develop people to gain that confidence and then actually do these things that are being asked and challenge them in a way.
I think that's a really brilliant point that I hadn't even considered. The first time she performed it was in Tokyo.
Yeah.
And I never even thought, when you think of Japanese culture and etiquette, it's such a huge thing, and really sort of rebelling against everything that you sort of stand for, to sort of publicly go and cut something off, take something that doesn't belong to you and cut it off and humiliate in public almost, even though you have the artist's permission. But I actually watched recording when it was performed in New York. And it's an 8-minute long video, and I'll send it to you if you want, and I'll leave it in the show notes for people listening. And different kettle of fish over there. They got very into it, and actually towards the end of watching it, I felt quite sick. It's because, surprise, surprise, particularly the men that cut her clothes got really quite carried away with it, to the point that I was like, and again, the whole point is she just sits there quietly while people cut away at her clothes.
Yeah, she basically just goes into a trance during this whole performance. So it's as if she's not even there. And I know the clip that you're talking about, and it makes me feel very uncomfortable as a woman watching it.
Yeah.
There's like, I feel like there's like certain like groping, shall I say, that occurs in some of it that would make me feel really uncomfortable if I was to even like try and think what she would have been like sat there. Like, I don't think I have the strength to being able to sit through that. But what I like about the cut piece is instead of just sitting there and just waiting until it's all gone, she actually stands up at the end and makes them confront the reality of their decisions, what she's got them to do and what they've exposed her to be at the end, which is really, yeah, I find that just quite astonishing, honestly, how she puts that there.
It's a very excellent trick to play on people, because I think, well, again, it's a commentary on society. If you tell people there's absolutely no consequences, you can do what you want. They've done their instructions. I have got permission. I can cut her clothes off. But the second it's now over and they're left with the consequences of their actions, it makes them really quite like, oh God, we're all a bit uncomfortable here. Shouldn't really be standing up there half naked. But they did it. So I find it a very clever trick to play.
Yeah.
Kind of almost holding the mirror up to them.
Yeah. It kind of makes them confront the violence that they've put against her in a way, with the cutting of the things and how ego some people are, especially when it was performed in various places around the world. I'm not sure if this is right. I've heard it from somewhere, but I know I think she tried to perform it in Britain, and it got very to the point where there was major safety concerns because of the wonderful rep that Ono has with breaking up the Beatles.
Yeah.
Which is a shame, but it just shows how different cultures and so on react in different ways with this piece. So it's reflective on how each place in the world is where she has performed this, which is also absolutely interesting.
And how potentially petty they are when someone who has been sort of lugged with this very, very heavy label of the woman that broke up with her. But also very brave of her, actually, when you think about it. Brave of her because she's an exceptionally intelligent woman. And I think I just think she is so underestimated in terms of her knowledge and ability and craft.
Yeah.
And I've really enjoyed kind of checking myself, actually, being like, wow, again, like classic, don't judge a book by its cover. And I feel like I've done that with Yoko. And this performance cut piece is seen as like a standout moment of feminist art.
Yeah.
And conceptual art, really, and performance pieces. And it's really cutting edge. And again, you need to think of the context, 1960s. It's all about, everyone's very reserved. We're not really doing stuff like that.
Yeah.
To be that forward thinking and that brave is, she's a visionary, isn't she?
Definitely. I mean, what I like about this is that, in a sense, it's you are, as a woman, gaining that power, and show, you're kind of forcing yourself into that scene, into that art scene at the time, which was heavily dominated by men. And, as previous names that I mentioned, Marina Abramovich, Carol Schneemann, like they were consistently pushing that boundary. And she was one of the, I would say the monarchs of that as well, in terms of feminist performance art. The fact that she is within this piece, she's changing the audience role from just the viewer to the victimizer, the sadist, the aggressor, in just this movement of them just cutting a piece of fabric from her and exposing her in such a way, and having this, this closeness to her, and doing just a simple task that she was asked, but in a way that task is aggressive, and they're accepting that and coming to terms with playing that role. It's showing, well, this is what we as women have come across in our day-to-day. It's a sad fact, but it's true. And just like with other people, I've obviously come across with other things and everything like that, but at that time it was and it still is, but it was an even huger issue in a way.
Oh my gosh, yeah. There's so many discussions that have happened around this piece, but Yoko herself also refers to it as something that she wanted it to be a giving experience, something where when an artist normally puts something on a wall, they're sort of dictating what they're giving away to viewers. Where this was something she was saying, you can take what you need from me.
Yeah.
You decide where you want to cut, you decide what you want to do. And I feel that's, again, it's such an interesting concept to say to someone, here's a pair of scissors, what do you need from me? Take it. And I don't know how I would feel if I was invited, because if I was invited to cut someone's clothes, it's very violating, isn't it? Your
Mhm.
personal space, it's your identity. And it was something to do with she wore her best suit. As you said, it was
Yeah.
something that was made for her. It was her best piece of clothing. Yeah, I find it so fascinating.
Yeah. And then she challenged that idea of participation when she wrote like a book of collaborative of like pieces that she wanted the audience to engage with her book, the Grapefruit book,
Yeah.
which there is some brilliant ones in there. I must admit, like some of them do make me giggle, but but I feel like that's like from an immature perspective of just, oh, I think that's funny. But I think obviously if you were to do those things, you would have a different sense of you coming out at the other end. I mean, I
Yeah.
know you mentioned what was it again? The tuna
Oh, the
sandwich
tuna
one.
fish sandwich one, yeah. So what did she call these again? There's a specific word that she has
I
for them.
can't-
It's yeah, they're instructions essentially. They're sort of like invitations and oh God, was it a
yeah,
musical term or something like that? Anyway,
something like that.
something like this. Well, if I remember, I'll write it in the show notes. But I actually, so as you mentioned, the book was called Grapefruit, and it was a series of essentially instructions and activities to get people involved, like not activities, but prompts, if you will, to get people involved. And I found PDF online. I'll leave it in the show notes. Gemma, I sent it to you
Yeah,
before
I'm
we hit
having a look
record.
through.
And I found one called the tuna fish sandwich piece. And it goes like this. Imagine 1,000 suns in the sky at the same time. Then let them shine for an hour. Then let them gradually melt into the sky. Make one tuna fish sandwich and eat. 1964 spring. So that's how she signs them off as this was her
Yeah.
idea at that point in time. I just yeah, that
And
made me
it's
laugh a lot.
it's interesting, some of them. And like I think I like did one at the like this is like back in my college days,
Yeah.
and it was you had to walk in various different things and try not make a sound.
Yes, oh my gosh, I saw this. I saw this. Yes, walk in the footsteps of the person in front, on
Yeah.
the ground, in the mud, in the snow, on the ice, and water.
Yeah, and the whole point of it is you have to be silenced regardless of what terrain and so on that you're on. And I can remember in that moment, I was like over analyzing in my head as to, but how? Like, I
Yes.
don't understand. Like, and I was getting frustrated at myself at first because I was like, this doesn't make sense. And I was doing this from an artist research point of perspective because I wanted to record me doing this thing so then I could present it for like my overall like final piece and stuff, and that I was using different research from. And I kept like, I don't know, I just kept second guessing myself as to if I move like this, I know it's going to make a sound. So surely it should be, I shouldn't move if I'm not to make a sound at all. And it was this constant like second guessing myself. And
Yeah.
like I had to trick myself in the end just to get over it and just do it and just try and just see what I could do. And like some of them, like for example, water, that was just insane. It was a case
Yeah.
of like moving my body as slow as I physically could. And I have not moved my body as slow as I've done that before. And it was weird to like be able to notice certain parts of my body moving in a certain way because I was trying to slow myself down that much to not be able
Mm.
to make a sound. And it just makes you more aware of like how you run, basically, how your body
Yeah.
moves. And you just have like this realization of, oh, there's actually more pieces of my body that actually move to actually make me move in that certain way and so on that
Mhm.
you never really think about before. And you get like a whole, you're more aware of your breathing and how you're taking in breath and how your chest moves and so on. So it's very grounding of an
Yeah.
experience as
And
well.
it's making you present, isn't it? And
Yeah,
appreciating the moment and little things. Because I thought that as well when I was like, how do you move through water without making a sound? That's impossible.
with great difficulty.
Oh, I love that that's the one that you went for because obviously snow's in there as well, but we'd be waiting for a very, very long
Very
time.
long time.
I also saw that as like a checklist, like you have to do all five of you have to follow the same person in snow and water. And oh, I just loved it. It was great. And like I said, I'll leave a link to Grapefruit in the show notes, the PDF. Have a look through, and if you want to do any, do write Gemma and I. It will be great to see if
Yeah.
how you found it, especially how good a tuna fish sandwich tastes after imagining 1,000 suns. Um, so there's another really beautiful, beautiful work that you've included in your three pieces that we're going to chat about Yoko. So we're going to shoot forward a little bit now. So obviously Yoko, this piece sort of puts her on the map. It's from this piece that she's invited to show in London. While she's there, that's where she meets John Lennon, and then the rest they say is history. And that we're shooting past John Lennon's passed away. It's now 1996.
Yeah.
And you've picked a really beautiful thing that I have seen at weddings, and I was like, this was Yoko Ono's idea.
Yeah, so the piece we're talking about is a wish tree, and it probably is what you probably think of, especially you've just mentioned it's normally at weddings, which is it's just a tree that people are welcome to come across and write what their true wish, their true desire is on this tag, and then tie it onto the tree, and then that's it. And people from all over the world have done this. She's got several trees like all across the world and so on that are wish trees. And the idea of this is like based on her experience as a child in Japan. So I've actually got a quote from her, which was, so I used to go to a temple and write out on a wish on a piece of thin paper and tie it around the branch of a tree. Trees in temple courtyards were always filled with people's wishes, wish knots, which looked like white flowers blossoming from afar. And when you see pictures of these, when they're fully filled out, they do look like they're blossoming because they're just that full and that bright, full of all this white, and it's just a beautiful thing. And it's like, although there's like this kind of fairy tale likeness to it as well, with people like being able to willingly volunteer that, that little wish, no matter how twee or how simple it is, it could be, or whatever, they still put it on there in like the hopes of that, fairy tale idea of, oh, it'll come true kind of thing. Like when you put a penny in the wishing well or things like that kind of thing. And just the sentiment behind it, it's just really sweet. Like I find it really like homely, and it's a participatory like piece of work that is got, I'd say, a nicer tone to things. But it's also making, the person kind of have this like confrontation with themselves of, what is my actual thing? Like, and it may be something they may have never admitted to anybody else ever, or may not admitted to themselves, and they may have just released that out onto there. And it kind of reminds me of Gillian Waring, I think her name is, with when she went up to people and she asked them what their desire, like what their thoughts were. And so she got them to write on a piece of paper. Who would write it down, and she'll take a picture of them with this piece of paper, and she put and some of them were just so like bizarre. Like some of them were like confessing to affairs they were having. Some were about, how deeply they're really depressed. Some were about how grateful they are. Like there was lots of different things, and it kind of made me think of that with this wish tree, how like there's another link there to another artist that she's hopefully inspired in a way with that. Like lots of different connections that I was getting from this, which was really interesting.
It's beautiful. And to link it back to what we were saying about Cup piece and her book Grapefruit, again, it's a very, very simple instruction, isn't it? That you're
very
given.
Simple.
It's just, so I'm going to make a wish, write it down on a piece of paper, fold it and tie it around a branch of a wish tree. Ask your friends to do the same. Keep wishing until the branches are covered with wishes. It's lovely.
That's it. It's just lovely. And I feel like during that time, like if you think back to the 90s, like it was a bit of, there's some uncertainty and stuff still around then. And to have something as simple as that, as a putting hope out into the world, basically, it's just like a beautiful sentiment in itself. And one thing that I like about it is, although like there's all these wish trees in the world, obviously over time she's had to collect people's wishes, and she's put them in what is called the Imagine Peace Tower. But she never reads them, because she intentionally doesn't read them, because she wants to preserve that wish and keep it as full of its intent as it possibly could be, without putting judgment on it or anything like that. And for me, natural curiosity, I feel, would get in the way. Like, like I would want to know, because I'd be like, come on, there must be something weird or something different or something that, I may think is like completely bizarre, and I just kind of want to know. But the fact that she has the integrity to not do that, and she preserves them in such a way that is like, it's kind of just a nice humbling way to like kind of hold it all together and keep it close. And like, it just really says a lot about a character, I feel like, as well, by doing that, such an act.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel it's honouring, it's a mark of respect to people that have taken part and have shared what is potentially quite a vulnerable part of yourself. You know, a wish can be something so minuscule, and a wish, or it can be the thing that you want the most in the world. It can be tiny and so specific to you and so inconsequential to others, or, you know, something as huge as world peace and things like that. It's really beautiful. And what I really love, as you said, she collects them all. And in the Imagine Wish Tower, which is an installation in Iceland. So all your wishes are collected and sent and buried at the base of this huge beacon in Iceland. I don't know why Iceland. Do you know why it's in Iceland?
I'm not sure, if I'm being completely honest.
I couldn't read any. I couldn't.
Yeah.
Well, what I also really love is that you can send your wishes straight there if you don't have a wish tree. And there's an email address. I'm going to leave a link to it in the show notes below, because I actually sent a wish to it before we recorded.
Oh, lovely.
I was like, I had this thing and I was like, I'm just going to send a wish. And I love that there's an email address and there's an address that you can physically write to. And I just love that idea of just like a moment of doing something a wee bit unusual in your day, especially as an adult. Like, finished work, recorded a podcast, sent a wish to Yoko Ono. Like, you know, that's not a typical Monday, that's not a typical Monday checklist.
Yeah.
So I just loved it. And I loved that that was one that you had chosen, because it's so iconic and it's something that's been adapted into, as I said, like weddings. And I'm pretty sure I've seen it at the National Trust when there's like the open day. And amazing that it's, I don't know, but then is there something here that, is it because it's Yoko Ono and it's a woman artist that it's been forgotten about, that's the link? Whereas if it was a man that came up with it, do we think, I mean, that's a whole other kind of work.
That's a whole different thing, isn't it, in itself? And honestly, if we went into that, I feel like we'd be here a lot longer. Yeah,
4.5 hours later, we get on to the final work. Yeah, I love it. And, you know, if you're listening and this is brand new information to you and you see these wish trees at a National Trust property or at a wedding or whatever, spread the good word. It's Yoko Ono's piece that's been adapted and taken and has got, you know, has legs and keeps inspiring people. So I think that's a lovely thing as well to take away from it, is to sort of like champion her as this was her idea, actually.
Yeah, and it goes into her activist roots as well, because she's just promoting basically just hope for joy, for world peace. Like, it's just a beacon of hope. That's what this tower represents. And that comes from, you know, people see pictures of her with Lenin in like these like, oh my god, the bed-ins and stuff like that, and all these like poignant activist times, and they just think, oh my god, that's a bit much. But with this, it's like, you know, she's still proclaiming that, she's still delving into those roots, but she's presenting it in a way that's so accessible to everybody, which is something that I greatly appreciate.
Well, that's it, because everyone's got a wish. You might not always want to say, but everyone does. No, I love it. I love that we haven't touched on how much of an activist that she was as well, actually, because when I first started reading about her this afternoon, it was like her works, she branches into music, film, art, war activism, sculpture, public art, and writing, poetry, and it just sort of reamed of all the things that she's got a lot of fingers and a lot of pies. And again, exceptionally talented, and she's won a Grammy. She's won a Grammy for her music. I had no. She won our album of the year.
Which again, nobody would know, because she's that unspoken in terms of anything creative. I feel like the only exposure they've seen of her in a creative sense is the collaborative voice works that she did with Lennon. I don't know if you heard any of these.
No.
But they put you in such a weird trance. I'll be completely honest. Like, when I first listened to one, I was a bit, I feel like this is a bit too much for me. But then after delving into it, and like, I was like, okay, I can understand why now. I may not have appreciated it, but I can understand why that was there. But there's like a couple of like music things that she did with Lennon, which was like focusing on like the range of voice and making different sounds. And it was like kind of like this harmonic like trance that it puts you under. which was quite interesting. And that was like obviously in the earlier days.
Mm.
But people, that's my first like way that I came across with her in terms of like the music side of things. So I'm surprised nobody knows that she's got a Grammy in a way, because they just think, oh, well, that's different. Don't like that.
Well,
to put it simply.
yeah. And I read it on a Wikipedia page, whether it's right or wrong. She's one of the most successful club artists because she's done all these collaborations.
It boggles the mind on how she's done all this stuff, and yet she hasn't had a voice in a way, which is quite ironic when her whole thing is about having a voice, being that activist, shouting out for all these causes and so on within her work, and trying to voice these different things that she's come across in all of her works.
So that leads us very nicely on to the final piece. And again, the second I read what this was and Googled it, I was like, what? Kasama has ripped this off. And because the Tate had one of Kasama's infinity rooms.
Yeah.
This is essentially what it is.
Yep.
And again, giving voice to people, whether your opinion is right or wrong. And this is a work called Add Colour, Refugee Boat. Do you want to tell?
So it's an installation piece, and it's just a white room. And in this room is a boat that was used to get refugees over. And it's another simple instruction that's just written, and there's like canisters of blue paint around, and all she asks is for people to like write their message basically again regarding this. So I don't have the full set of instructions. I don't know if you do for this, because I could not find the exact set words, but that was one thing I struggled finding when I was revisiting this piece again.
Yeah, no, I don't. I've got a quote from her about what it's about, but I don't have her prompts, if you will, which is like a very like, it's like a calling card of each of her works. It's it's very like, you need the audience to help make the work in your voice.
But basically the audience were invited to write about their stance on basically the refugee boat and stuff like that. Like I think they were told what it was, if I remember rightly. And obviously there was quite a lot of different messages that got voiced. So there was it just basically got filled with all this blue, basically making it into like a sea, which was I feel like the intention with this. And there was some quotes that people wrote with this paint, which was like, protect the persecuted, tear down the wall, kindness and compassion above all. But then there was obviously others that had conflicting views with what you would hope would have been, all positive. You're obviously going to get conflicting views with topics like this. And it was very interesting to see that eventually, as more and more got written and painted over on top of each other, they just ended up washing each other out, because it just completely became a sea of blue, basically. And they just like melded into one and just like focused on, well, this is this kind of thing. And she said herself, like, the experience that she had, again, going back to way in the beginning with like the bombings and stuff like that, although she wasn't a refugee, she had similar connections in terms of what they went through as a family, and then coming over to New York. And there was quite a lot of similarities that Ono had, and therefore wanted to raise, again, following her activist back roots and everything like that. She wanted to bring this subject to discussion. And it wasn't a in-your-face way of doing it. It wasn't like something like radical or like that. It was just something simple and allowed people to have a conversation with each other without being in the same room as each other, just leaving words behind.
Anonymously as well, but kind of like keyboard warriors, but before the keyboard really an offline keyboard warrior. But words are powerful though, and that's the thing. And words you can read things and not know who they're from and empathize with people, or you can completely rebel against what they say and infuriate you, and that in itself is very interesting.
And some people did, like, some people would purposely erase stuff they didn't agree with. Like, they would be like, that's so angry. And like, you would see there would be random splatters where some people have took the paint cans and just chucked it against the wall because they were not happy with what one person decided to write, God knows how many hours, days ago. And it was interesting to see how it became like a beautiful argument in a way, with how the paint ended up just blending with each other and so on, is how I would personally describe it.
Yeah, it's an amazing work, and it's got two dates. So it says 1960 slash 2019. So was the idea conceived in 1960 but wasn't performed?
I believe that was the case. Yeah.
Okay.
So, which was very interesting that she had this idea so far back, but to me it makes sense again with the time that she would have conceived it was the time when all this stuff was going off, as we discussed before. But obviously, I feel like she was very restricted with what she could do around that time. And it led her to then obviously do Cut Piece, which was very simple in design, but it had to be simple in design for her to be able to get out and do it, kind of thing, because that's all the tools that she had to hand.
Yeah.
But the simplicity of those tools made it even more powerful, which is interesting.
I find that about a lot of her work. The ideas are very simple, and she's not doing anything that's wacky in terms of materials. It's very approachable things for our examples anyway. I'm sure she's got a couple of absolutely mental things out there, but it requires audience participation to make the piece have meaning and actually exist in the first place.
Yeah.
And it's very simple. Here's some paint, here's some scissors, here's a pen. That's your tools, and you can help create this piece. I think it's amazing. Add Colour really, really shook me that I'd never bloody heard of it. Why have I not heard of this? I've got 15 years of art historical lectures, teachings, listenings, readings, exhibitions. I've never heard of any of these.
I feel in a way talking about Ono is a taboo in itself.
Yes.
Because of the only association that most people know for, which is she broke the Beatles up, she's the worst woman ever, and so on. Because of that and how much of an outrage it caused, and still does to this day, even though that's how many years behind us now, and everyone's done their own things, everything's gone separate ways and so on, and they're of an older generation. So, it's that thing. But because it's still such a big taboo to talk about because of all this outrage, all this controversy she caused. So just talking about her, it just even acknowledging her work, I feel like it gets underwritten, it gets pummeled down in a way.
Yeah.
Which is very sad, because all her work is wanting to do is to reach out to people. So from, this big thing that happened and everything, and yes, all she's ever wanted to do is to reach out to people, and the main public have kind of put their back to her.
Yeah.
Which is, an interesting concept to come to terms with when looking at her relationship with. She just wants people to interact with her. She doesn't want anything else. She's not trying to cause us grief or anything like that. She just wants to do that. That's all she's asking.
And I think she's quite humble in a way. Now, I wasn't around in the 80s. I'm sure I could go down the stairs and my mum would have one or two things to say. None of them good.
Yeah.
And I'm sure maybe people listening to this were like, oh no, she was a pain in the arse. She was everywhere. She was all over the tabloids. But considering how prolific she is, and that these artworks are, particularly something like Wish Tree, is a living, breathing thing, and, Add Colour, Refugee Boat, happened in 2019. It's not publicised. They're very quiet happenings. Even the exhibition in Liverpool, as I said, I accidentally came across it because I was in Liverpool. There was no big advertising campaigns. Very humble. She's not like your contemporary superstars now who, if Damien Hirst is about to drop something, Tracy Emin's going to do something, you know about it a fortnight before it happens, and then that's all you can talk about. She's very humble. And actually, again, just reiterating what you said, the artwork's not about her, it's about connecting the audience with each other, and more importantly, themselves. What's important to them.
Exactly. And it's more about getting people's voices heard as well.
Yeah.
So and allowing everybody to talk.
Yeah. You have every right to use your voice and do it. That in itself is the most powerful form of activism you can have. Use your voice.
Yeah, Definitely.
Oh, I love it. Gem, honestly, thank you so much. This is two artists who you have completely blown my mind with. First, Marina Abramovich, now Yoko Ono. I think I'll probably release these back to back because it will be great to see everyone being like, oh my gosh, she completely inspired all these people.
Yeah.
Now, I've already asked you my big question that I normally ask everybody, but I'm going to ask you, why is Yoko Ono's work important?
I think in terms of feminism, she is highly important because she was one of the very first voices that voiced what we want, basically trying to establish what is wrong with the world and how we want equality, essentially. And she's just done that just on the basis of movement. And I think that is the most powerful thing, to be able to navigate that topic with not words, just what she's doing. So that's why I feel like she's so important. But I also think that in terms of artists that I've come across, she is the only one that has consistently asked for people to participate and to voice what they feel, what their concerns are, everything. She's the only one that has consistently asked that for her whole art career. And just opening up conversation, no matter how big or small, is important.
Love that. Oh, I love it. I love it. And I've loved having you back on. And I've loved spending an afternoon reading about Yoko Ono. And everyone that's listening, if you want to connect with Gemma, her Instagram and her website will be in the show notes, along with a whole host of links to Yoko Ono and a couple of talks as well. Particularly there's a great one that she did at the Serpentine when she, during the show that Gemma referenced really early on in the episode. And it's about an hour long, and it's great to hear her speak about her pieces. So do check that out. Thank you so much for coming back on.
Thank you very much.
And there you have it, another episode of Jo's Art History podcast. If you've enjoyed the show, please make sure to like, rate and subscribe. It does really help in letting other people find us. You can listen to Jo's Art History podcast on any streaming platform, and you can also watch it in a video format on YouTube. If you would like to support the podcast in any way, I have now released an Amazon wish list, which you can also find in the show notes below. This will allow you to donate in part or purchase in full an art historical text that is of interest to me and that will help in research towards future episodes. And it would be really wonderful if you've listened to quite a lot of these, if you could buy that as a way of marking patronage towards the podcast, that would be brilliant. If you would like to get in touch, please do. It's always lovely to hear from people. You can email me, joesarthistory@gmail.com, or you can get in touch with me via Instagram, which is @joesarthistory, or you can search for my name, Jo McLaughlin, via Instagram, and you will find me there. That's all we have from the podcast this week. Thank you so much for listening. Once again, I'll remind you to keep learning, and remember, art is for all. Bye.